Oh, stink. I didn't pull up the PowerPoint. I have everything ready to go with that. Sorry. Okay, that's kind of funny. All right. Am I sharing my screen?
No.
No? Huh. Wow, what a rookie. All right, here we go. Nope. My computer is doing really strange things. I'm going to shut this. All right. Sorry, having some issues. Okay. All right, so we are getting started. So welcome to Plan Unit C presentation. My name is Dory Dalton. I'm the Wildland Specialist and I'm a firefighter for the Genesee Fire Protection District, and I'm also a community member. This evening, you will hear from Brian Mallett, the Open Space Manager, Nancy Balter, Becky Smith from Genesee Fire and Safety Committee, and Chris Garlasco, also of the Genesee Fire and Safety Committee, will also be moderating. Our presentation is recorded and will be posted for later viewing on GFR and the Genesee Foundation websites. We've set aside an hour and a half. You will be muted. And please, as questions come up for you, just put them in the chat box and we will keep track of them and answer them at the end of this presentation. So what is a community wildfire protection plan? So our plan was updated from the 2008 report. It was an 18-month project and it was completed in April of 2021 in partnership with the Forest Stewards Guild. The CWPP is a tool for Genesee Fire Rescue, land managers, residents, and HOAs to help prioritize projects to make our district safer and more prepared for wildfire emergencies. Remember, this is a snapshot in time, and this project includes data collected by driving all the roads and a general on-the-ground assessment of risk factors. All right, so this evening, you'll hear me refer to the 60th, 90th, and 97th percentile. And I just want you to know that we model these potential wildfire behavior under these percentiles. These are conditions that occur in our district about 40%, 10%, and 3% of the days between June and October, the period we most often associated with the wildfire season. And the data was collected from 2009 to 2019. Our weather parameters came from data collected at the Lookout Mountain Remote Automatic Weather Station and fuels moisture conditions from the Fire Family Plus. When we talk about a red flag warning, that means fire weather conditions are present and include warm temperatures, very low humidity, and stronger winds, and are expected to combine to produce an increased risk of fire danger. The higher the percentage, the higher the fire danger. When I talk about the 97th percentile fire weather conditions modeled in the CWPP, this would qualify for a red flag warning, and they're similar to the conditions that occurred during the Elephant Butte fire in July of 2020 to the southwest of the district. The Genesee Fire Protection District experienced 5 red flag warnings in 2019 and 16 red flag warnings in 2020. This season, we had 3 red flag warning days in November and 4 in December. During that time, there were multiple wildfires, including the most destructive wildfire in Colorado history on December 30th. The conditions used for the 90th percentile fire weather scenarios would constitute a red flag warning day only if widespread thunderstorms were predicted for the area with a possibility of lightning strikes. And conditions used for the 60th percentile weather scenarios have higher fuel moistures and lower wind speeds. This evening, we are doing the Plan Unit C presentation. You can see on the map in front of you, your plan unit is outlined right here with the thick black line, and the addresses are on the screen. The plan units were created along HOA boundaries and property boundaries with considerations of roadways and topographical features. So this evening, I want to mention 3 ways, the most common ways that wildfire threatens our homes. You can see the radiant heat on the left, and radiant heat is the energy that's transferred through the air to other objects when materials burn. If a house receives enough radiant heat for a sufficient time, it will ignite without flames contacting it. Sometimes radiant heat can break the glass and windows, allowing windblown embers to enter the home. Even if the radiant heat exposure isn't large enough or long enough to result in ignition, it can preheat surfaces, making them more vulnerable to ignition from exposure to flames and embers. Even vegetation and other fuels located away from the house can pose a threat. On the top right is an example of windblown embers or ember showers. Embers are the most common cause of home ignition. They're light enough to be blown through the air and can result in the rapid spread of wildfires by spotting in which embers are blown ahead of the main fire and start other fires. Imagine a blizzard, but instead of snow, embers. And then the bottom picture shows an example of direct flame contact. And direct flame contact is when fire reaches your home through the tree crowns or along the surface of the ground to your home. All right. Again, Plan Unit C is highlighted or in the dark with the dark black around it. It's pretty much right smack in the middle here, you can see. So before I tell you about your plan unit's hazard ratings, I need everyone to understand that the entire Genesee Fire Protection District is 95% more likely to have a wildfire as compared to the rest of the US. This puts us at an extreme hazard rating. The ratings of the different plan units are relative to one another, and they're based on 4 variables. And the first variable I'm going to talk about is fire risk, and it's the middle graphic on the top row. And fire risk is based on fire behavior. And this would include the wind, the temperatures, and low humidity during the fire, the topography of the area, the location, and the fuel in the area. And you can see that the fire risk here is a moderate rating, a moderate hazard rating. To the right of that, we have suppression challenges. And again, this is going to be based on the fire behavior. It's also going to be based on the challenges that could arise getting equipment to the area to fight the fire. It's important to have that roadside vegetation cleared. The optimal driveway and roadside clearance is 13.5 feet high by 20 feet wide. And these are based on Jefferson County recommendations and Genesee Fire Rescue apparatus size. And you can see that the suppression challenge hazard rating in this section is a moderate hazard rating. The next variable I'm going to talk to you about is the evacuation hazards, and it's down on the bottom row in the middle. And you can see this is going to be based on, again, fire behavior. It's going to be based on where we're located in the plant, within the district, the visibility during the fire, the width of the road, the type of notification you receive when you're evacuating. Is it the entire community evacuating or just part? Are residents exiting while resources are entering, creating two-way traffic? Are you coming down a non-survivable road? And you can see that this hazard rating is at an extreme hazard rating. And then the last variable I'm going to speak with you about is your home ignition zone hazard rating. And the home ignition zone is going to include things like your roof, your siding, and the defensible space around your home. And remember that defensible space is that 100-foot circle around your home or 150-foot circle if your home is situated on a slope. We, the firefighters, have to have space around your house to make a stand to prevent fire from reaching your house. Think about your house. Would we, the firefighters, be able to defend your house without putting our lives at risk? We'd like to see fire on the ground in mitigated areas where we can have a chance to stop the fire and not allow the fire to go from tree to tree because trees are too close and dense or have ladder fuels under them. We cannot fight fires in trees. And the hazard rating for this is a high hazard rating. And when you combine those variables, you can see right here that Plan Unit C's overall hazard rating is high. So given all that information I just gave you, the findings, the risks for Plan Unit C, we have some dense pockets of forests with ladder fuels. Flammable landscaping is common, so that would include the wood fencing, siding, retaining walls, walkways, pockets of pine needles, and plant selection near our homes. Over half of the private drives are narrow and do not have turnarounds adequate for firefighting equipment. Approximately 5% of roads Private drives and driveways have potentially non-survivable conditions. About 70% of the unit is at risk of passive or crown fire activity. About 20% of homes are at risk of extreme exposure to radiant heat. And these are when the conditions were modeled under the 90th percentile fire weather. All right. So when we look at the flame length, again, now on these, you're outlined in blue here, and you can see the majority of your plan unit is this light peach color with a little bit darker peach color and kind of this salmon, okay? So again, the modeling was based on fire weather conditions at the 90th percentile. In the majority of the plan unit, the fire will most likely be controlled with a hand line under the conditions modeled. Equipment may be needed if flame lengths become greater than 4 feet. When we move over to crown fire, again, we're highlighted in blue here. You can see the majority of the plan unit is this orange color with some yellow. Again, modeled at the 90th percentile fire weather conditions. And the modeling shows surface fire and passive crown fire, which means the fire is spreading due to surface fuel such as bushes, grasses, and other small trees under the canopy, and patches of stands torch due to the fuels below the trees. And again, Genesee Fire Rescue will fight the fire until the fire behavior makes it unsafe to do so. Okay. So this is a neighborhood that was destroyed due to ember cast or showers, like I mentioned earlier, from the surrounding homes. Please remember that embers can travel long distances. It can be from vegetation and it can be from nearby homes. You can see in this picture that the trees show scorching due to the homes burning. These homes were not caught on fire because of the trees. These homes burned because of the embers. And this is a picture from the Waldo Canyon fire. Okay. Oops, I'm sorry, I left out a picture. No, I didn't, it's gone. Okay, so you can see this picture is a property that survived the Cold Springs fire in 2016. This is a property owner that participated in a home assessment program that was offered there. The homeowner focused on their zone 2 defensible space 5 to 30 feet from their home. They had healthy tree spacing and they broke up the continuity of fuels. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So we're going to talk about canopy spacing and to help minimize flame length. So the recommended spacing between trees is 10 feet between crowns. When we talk about crowns, we mean from the most outer branches, not the top of the trees. And you want 10 feet between them. And if you have trees on slopes, then you want to space your trees out further than 10 feet. When we talk about limbing, you want to limb your trees up at least 6 to 10 feet from the ground or a third the total height of the tree, whichever's less. And when we talk about limbing, we mean the outer branches. We mean the branches, not at the trunk. So someone 6 feet tall should be able to walk under this tree without their head touching the branches. Removing ladder fuels. The example on the left shows you ladder fuels and branches down low. When these things catch on fire, they are able to climb up the tree. The tree on the right is a tree where the ladder fuels have been removed and it has been limbed properly. On the right, we have a home that has zone 2. There's not the continuity of fuels. You can see that the tree crowns are broken up. The grass, it's optimal to have it mowed to 4 inches. And all of these suggestions are based on the Colorado State Forestry Service guidelines. All right, so now I'm going to talk to you about your exposure risk. All right, and these exposure risks are due to your overlapping home ignition zones, potential exposure to short and long range spotting or embers, and potential exposure to radiant heat. Okay. When you look at the top graphic, it's right here. These arrows are pointing to it. And this one is under the 90th percentile weather fire conditions. You can see that about a third of the homes are at high risk and about a sixth of the homes are at extreme risk under these conditions. Okay. We move down to the 97th percentile. Okay. About a fourth of our homes are at high risk and a bit more than a third of the homes are at extreme risk under the 97th percentile fire weather conditions. And we're talking about the spotting due to embers and we're talking about the dangers from radiant heat. All right. So here's some examples of some of the things that you can do to get started to harden your home and your defensible space. You can create that 0 to 5 foot perimeter around your home with zero vegetation, nothing growing there. Removing those pine needles and debris from your roof. And that seems to be more than a one-time a year job now. Removing those flammable materials from beneath your decks and even on top of your deck. Remember, 50 to 90% of homes ignite due to embers rather than radiant heat. When you consider changing the materials on your home, consider flame-resistant materials for the exterior. We have a few examples from our area. Okay. This slide shows all decks, okay? So the thing you need to remember about decks is you don't want to store things flammable underneath them. You can see a lot of things stored right here. Again, and there's tall grass, if direct surface fire comes up and catches these things on fire, it will go directly to underneath your home and light the joists, the underneath of the deck, and the supports, which lead right to your home. And the middle picture shows a lot of fuel around this deck. There is no break in the canopy. The bottom picture here shows grass growing right up to the edge of the deck. Again, the grass catches fire and has enough time to catch things underneath the deck. The top picture shows a tree right next to the deck. Remember, when things are on fire, that the flame height is 2.5 to 3.5 times the height of the vegetation on fire. All right. So in this deck, on this slide, you're going to see we have a wall made from timbers, which many of us have. And here is firewood stored next to the timbers. So first of all, firewood piles, they can easily ignite from embers or surface fires, and they could emit a significant amount of heat and or direct flame contact that can ignite your home. So firewood piles need to be moved at least 30 feet from all structures and have at least 10 feet of clearance between the piles and all trees. All right. Now for the timbers, that gets a little trickier. What's the best thing to do? Well, to remove the timbers that are within 5 feet of your wood siding, but that's an expensive thing to do. So the recommendation is to clear vegetation at least 5 feet out from the timbers to prevent surface fires from spreading to the home. Okay. The top picture shows a slight gap under the door of the garage. And so our weather stripping gets worn out generally in the corners of the garage and along the side. So it's really important that we replace that weather stripping that gets worn away from the garage door and creates gaps where embers could enter our garage and ignite whatever is inside. All right, so this is a roof that comes down low to the ground, and this is snow. And we've done this to the homes so they're incognito. And you can see some bushes growing right up against the windows. And so, you really want to be cognizant of that because of the radiant heat that gets created, right, because of the windows. And then also you have this low overhang. So again, if these bushes catch on fire from direct flame contact, they're going to also catch the soffits on fire as well. So again, this area is a 0 to 5 zone 1. There should be no vegetation growing in this area. Okay. So in these pictures, the black, these represent houses. And what's significant about this is you can see that continuity of fuel. It's all the way around the house. And remember, you want to break that continuity up so that the fire can't come directly through the trees like a wick to your home. These trees need limbed, there's tall grasses. So we want to take care of those things so we can keep fire on the ground. This top right picture, you can see there's a driveway back here and there are a lot of trees. This is a road, I believe it's a private road. To drive through there, depending upon the wind created by the fire, the flame could be going over the road. You don't want to be trapped in your car. It's really important to thin the trees along the road. And in the bottom right picture, again, you can see a deck and you could just see fuel all around it. So again, just giving some some breaking up that continuity of fuel, right? The next slide. Okay, so the picture on the left, you can see this 0 to 5 space. It looks like the grasses have been cut, but again, it goes right up to the home. We want that 0 to 5 foot space. And here we have this decorative grass, and this is the edge of a house. So up here, it's going to be the soffit by the garage. And again, thinking about the flame height of those things, and it looks to be underneath a tree. And so that could be a ladder fuel to a tree. This house right here, lots of continuity of fuel up top, right? We want to break up that continuity so that the flames can't come all the way from back and touch the home. This picture on the right is a really good example of these currant bushes growing below. We've got this tall grass. Surface fire comes, ignites the grass, the bushes, these low hanging limbs on the tree, and then ignites other things around it. All right, on this slide, the slide on the left, you can see right here, we have a good example of that 0 to 5 with the rock. We want that. There are trees growing there. And if the trees are there, right, they need limbed. Okay, I totally would recommend that, but they do have that 0 to 5, which is really good. Up top, again, 0 to 5 using the rock and no vegetation. The slide below, you can see these vents, and this is something that's really important. Vents, the flaps need to close all the way. We don't recommend the plastic cages because if debris gets caught in there and embers are blowing, then it can ignite. And if the flaps are not something that close all the way, then the embers can get into those vents. So, and then again, you can see the ground has some vegetation debris on the ground. Okay. And if you're interested, I'm the person that gives home assessments to all of our community members. You make an appointment with me and I come to your home and you receive a report with mitigation recommendations and photographs. The recommendations, you can choose to implement them or not. It's your home. You own the data in the report. I don't share it with insurance companies, neighbors, or the ARC review committee. The report is stored on a server offsite, so it's not subject to any freedom of information request. It's a certificated program. If you choose to follow the recommendations and have me come back out, you can receive a certificate. And what is that good for? You can show your insurance company you're making efforts, and it's also a good point for when you resell your home. If you would like to contact me, my information is on the screen, and you will have the opportunity to get that information again a little later in the program. So, all right, Brian, are you ready?
Yep.
All right, I stopped sharing.
Great. Does that look right?
Yep.
Great. Okay, my name is Brian Mallett. I'm the Open Space Manager for Genesee Foundation. So the first thing that I like to share with folks is that we have an open space management plan where I put in there all the work that I plan to do over the next year. And that for 2022 is available on our website right now. And I did a presentation for that as well, similar to this Zoom presentation. It was open to the whole community, and that recording is also on our website. So a big part of our open space management plan is forestry work and wildfire mitigation. And we have planned at least 70 acres of that in the next 2 years that are grant funded for sure. And getting grant funding for forest restoration, large acres is our objective for all the treatment that we do. But it's a bit less, it's not as easy to get grant funding for things like roadside thinning, which don't fit the typical grants, along with defensible space as well, which I could talk about later. So what am I doing on open space? Briefly, this is the plan unit C there in red. The forest treatments that do touch that, I won't be getting into that until 2023. That's along the Rhine Streamside Trail. And then in orange there is the open space roadside thinning that I have planned for this year. We'll get as much done of that this year as we can, and then finish it up the following year. And then up here in the north is what I call the Chokecherry treatment area. The reason why we're doing that is because to the west is the Ski Hill Drive. According to our CWPP, that's the highest risk area for ignition and probable crown fire. So I'm doing what we can on open space to the east. And then over on the western part of Genesee, this is something I'll be starting probably not this year. We'll try to bid it out this year. It'll be contracted, but hopefully starting in 2023 and probably finishing then as well. So this is the western part of Genesee. These blobs represent what is open space on our western flank. I think that's a lot. That's most of it. So mitigating roadways and open space, it is a priority for Genesee Foundation to make our evacuation route safer. So there's been talk about additional egress roads, but my job is to deal with the one that we have right now, and that's what our fire department also wants me to focus on. So making our existing evacuation routes safer, and the way we do that is removing flammable vegetation along the roadside where Genesee Foundation has property. And so that begs the question of what about the private drives, driveways, those smaller roads? Property owners are responsible for mitigating your own roadway, your driveway as part of your defensible space, and your evacuation route that you own is part of your defensible space. And so a lot of Genesee, those private drives, we maintain the road itself, like we plow it. If there are potholes, things like that, we will fix it. But most of the time that the land that private drive is on is owned by Genesee residents. It's not actually owned by the Genesee Foundation. And so that's why I put that bullet in there. And then also for defensible space, oftentimes Genesee Foundation residents, their parcels are, rather their defensible space extends 0 to 5 feet, zone 1, 5 to 30 feet is zone 2, and then zone 3 is 30 to 100 feet. Oftentimes that 100 feet goes into defensible space, or excuse me, into open space. And you are able to remove trees on open space just going through the ARC process. And it all starts with reaching out to me, and I can walk you through that. But hey, to remove that tree for your defensible space, and going back to that map that I showed you before, we have our priorities for our 1,200 acres, and we have to prioritize. And right now, our biggest priority is our evacuation route. Yeah. So wildfire mitigation on open space and private property, everything that I talk about and that Dory talks about, all of her recommendations and all of the things that I do on open space are based on the best available science. And that's in the form of the Colorado State Forest Service and their publications and their professional foresters. And a lot of this information has been around for decades. For example, what Dory was talking about with defensible space, 10-foot crown spacing, having 5 feet of non-flammable surface, and all the things on your home hardening list, that information has been available for a long time, and a lot of it has come out of California, and it's been proven time and time and again. Dory showed those pictures at the top showing people that created defensible space and their homes survive. It's not a guarantee, but you're improving your chances. And so what Dory and I talk about, what she marks trees for on your property, and what I do on the open space, we hope for the best, such as the Elephant Butte fire, which was a relatively small fire in a very dense area. Nobody was hurt, no structures were lost. But we have to plan for the worst, which is the Cameron Peak fire, which had the most acres burned in a year, and then the Marshall fire, which was the most destructive fire in Colorado history. So those are the things when we talk about removing trees next to your house, and those are very valuable trees to you, but we have to plan for the worst, and that means making those hard decisions and removing those very valuable trees. And so sometimes folks will say to me, literally, if it's going to burn, why should I do anything? There's three reasons why you should. First reason, Dory mentioned this, firefighters are going to try to come in and fight that fire. And it is your responsibility to make that scenario as safe as possible for your firefighters. keeping in mind they're volunteers, they're your neighbors. Those are the folks that are going to come and fight that fire if they can. So removing trees along your roadway, along your driveway, around your house, making it safe for them to try and protect your home and trying to make it safer for you to leave. So that's the second reason, evacuation route, why you should do something. And I'll show some pictures about that, but you can make your evacuation safer. So I'm going to do what I can on the roads where Genesee Foundation butts up to our evacuation route, but it's your responsibility to do it where you can on your property. And sometimes, and I have a picture on this, sometimes you are the home at the top of the driveway that everybody else has to drive by. If there are small shrubs or trees that are on your property, but everybody else has to drive by them, that could be a potential obstacle if there's a fire for the rest of your neighbors to drive through. And then the third reason why you should do anything on your property in your home is because you can save your home. Like I mentioned and Dory mentioned, you can increase the chance that your home will survive and not ignite. So what are we trying to avoid? Again, worst case scenario, that bottom left picture is from the Paradise Fire in California, where folks were literally driving through fire for hours and hours to get out of their neighborhood. It was a very densely populated and densely forested neighborhood, and it took a while for them to get out. Even with advance notice, they ran into fire. And so we want to avoid that by removing flammable vegetation along the roadside. So what is a non-survivable roadway? It's talked about in our CWPP, and in Plan Unit C, it was identified those few private drives in there in the south. And the actual definition is portion of roads adjacent to areas with predicted flame lengths greater than 8 feet. Just a note on flame lengths. Flame lengths are typically 2 to 3 times the height of the fuel source. So if you have grass that is 3 foot tall and dried out, the flame length coming off of that could be 6 to 9 foot tall. Not for very long, but if it's windy and there's a bunch of those right next to each other, which we have, and those are right by the road, then they're going to be bent over, and it's going to be 6 to 9 feet of fire hanging, blocking the road. So that's what we want to avoid. Same thing with trees as well. And so the next sentence is kind of poignant. Drivers stopped or trapped on these roadways would have a low chance of surviving radiant heat from fires of this intensity. So I'll just go back to this map and Plan Unit C, and this is where I took some photos. And I think folks, this is a pretty small plan unit, and the folks on here, I think I know one of you at least live near on this private drive. So you can see on the imagery there's a lot of trees, and that's generally why that's a non-survivable road. So I'll go to some pictures. So when I talk about roadside mitigation, I tell folks the bare minimum you want is a 15-foot box of no flammable vegetation. So on the left there, that lowest branch is about 15 foot tall. So it's maybe I think it was a little under 15 feet. So that's hanging over the road. And our private drives generally are only about 14 feet wide. I think you all know when it's snowing and there's a little bit of snow on the road, it's hard for 2 cars to pass by. So it's a narrow road. And if you think about a fire coming in, it could be pretty easy for flame lengths to extend all the way across the road, preventing evacuation. So I blacked out the houses as best I can. That's what those blobs are. I just wanted to note on this drive, it has a slope along on the right side there. Most of our roads in Genesee, private drives, and all our evac routes have slopes on either side, up or down. Sensible space, you increase the distance of your thinning when you are accounting for a slope. Same idea when you're doing roadside thinning. You want to cut a few more trees because fire can travel faster uphill, and if it's a wind-driven fire, those flames are going to be closer to the ground. You're going to generally have more dense vegetation. There's going to be heavier flames coming up that way. And then I noted at the end there, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a few smaller trees that are grouped together, and they're all right next to the road. Pruning, you don't always have to remove a tree. Pruning a tree is a good option if you can't remove it, or if it's an isolated tree. So Dory mentioned this, 10 foot up or 1/3 the height of the tree. That's generally the recommendation for pruning, and that's to prevent the tree itself from igniting from ladder fuels. Although I'll point out over to the right here, we have a lot of tall trees that are either self-pruned. Ponderosa pine do that. They'll drop their own branches and focus branches on the top where they're getting sunlight. And that's an indication of a overly dense forest, when a ponderosa pine has to drop its own branches. So don't see a lot at the bottom, definitely not the first 10 feet, maybe 25 feet up is when you get to your first branch. So this is a dense forest. So just pruning there is not going to cut it. You have a lot of fuels over there, and removing some of the actual trees that are along the road would be necessary for roadside mitigation. And that's the kind of thing that I do on open space. And so here's that one I was talking about at the end. There's a few, it's not a great picture, but there's 3 or 4 smaller trees that are just at the top of the road. This private drive winds up there, and then Foothills Drive North goes right up there. So it's at the top. A lot of folks would have to drive past that. So everybody has something that they can do. That's the purpose of these plan units, is talking to a smaller group of folks and just letting them know that there's a lot of work that can be done. Doing it together and having a social responsibility around it generally is more helpful to get it done. And just pointing things out too, because folks don't know. That's also part of it, is education. And then just to point out that we all know that this is dry grass during the fire season under the snow. And then over here to the right, you have clumps of trees. This tree is probably, the actual stem of the tree is 10 to 12 feet away from the road. But if all of this group of trees is on fire, it's going to easily exceed 8-foot flame lengths, and it would easily have flame, if the wind is coming this way, have flame lengths that would overcome the road itself. So it's not everything it's not just what's right next to the road, it's also a couple feet out. It's thinking about that kind of forest restoration as well, where you're looking at the larger forest and thinking about thinning more than just what's right next to the road. Again, something that I do on open space. And this one I like to point out, this was actually on Montaigne, but the less trees you have, the more sun, and you're going to have icy roads for less amount of time, which is a plus. So I'll turn it over to Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Balter. I'm a member of the Genesee Fire and Safety Committee. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about evacuation and emergency preparedness. The CWPP modeled evacuation times for the entire fire district, assuming that the entire district got evacuation notices at the same time. And they modeled it for 1 car or 2 cars per residential address. The takeaways from this graphic show that your plan unit, and in fact, a large part of the southern and middle portion of Genesee, could have evacuation times greater than 2 hours, maybe as much as 4 hours in order to get out. So the one message, you see the difference between 1 car per residential address and 2 cars per residential address. If you get an evacuation notice, it is tempting to load up both cars and take both cars. So should there be a fire here, you wouldn't lose all your cars. But in consideration of the entire community, please only take 1 car. It's more important that we get people out of here. When this modeling was done, I naively said, well, aren't we modeling for worst case situation? And it really isn't. It doesn't take into account the fact that we could have dense smoke that also impedes our evacuation. There could be accidents. Believe me, if you get a notice to evacuate, you are going to be a little panicked and not necessarily thinking clearly. So there are lots of ways in which even this dire, to me it looks dire looking scenario, could be worse depending upon what the circumstances were. When I look at this, and I live about as far away from the exit as you can be, one of the things that I've decided for myself is I don't need to wait for an evacuation notice. If we are threatened by fire, it is better just to leave. And you can always come back, it's no big deal. But we are very concerned about life safety. And what Brian showed you about non-survivable roadways, and he didn't really show you the graphic of all the non-survivable roadways, including some of our major evacuation routes. So if you are stuck in traffic because there's a lot of traffic and it's not moving, and you are in an area of non-survivable roadway and the wildfire reaches you, we have a significant life safety concern. We are working very hard. Brian talked about that he is prioritizing removing trees on the non-survivable roadway areas where they abut open space. But we're going to need residents to also begin thinking about this. And plans are being discussed, but if you live in a non-survivable roadway area, we may knock on your door and talk to you about removing some of the roadside trees. And we're trying to figure out how we can facilitate that, but it is definitely something that we are looking at. We, as I think you know, if you saw the Genesene, we are also looking at the benefits of creating an additional evacuation route to the south. And one of the things that we really need to be aware of is that we all go north to evacuate. Suppose we can't, suppose our access is blocked by fire and we can't get to the northern evacuation routes. Or that 70 is unusable because it's been involved in fire or accidents or whatever. We have the possibility, if we don't have an evacuation route in another direction, we have the possibility of residents having no choice but to stay in their homes and wish for the best. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, we have a lot of challenges with respect to egress. We have the non-survivable roadway issue, which can also affect firefighters being able to get into an area. We have the very long evacuation times, and we have the fact that we all need to go to the north in order to get out of Genesee. Next slide.
Might be delayed.
Just, I think it is. Before we talk about emergency preparedness, just to say that the same things that Brian talked about in terms of the private drives apply to your roadway, your driveway as well. The fire could start or reach your home quickly, and we want you to be able to get out of your driveway. So you want to have crown spacing. You don't want to have ladder fuels, things close to the ground that if they caught fire would lead, and it would lead up to a tree and involve a tree. And the other thing just to mention is be sure that firefighters and emergency responders can find your house, that they know what your address is. If you've lived in Genesee for any amount of time and have an address that you're trying to find, sometimes you cannot see a house number associated with houses. It should be, the house number should be reflective, and a firefighter or an ambulance going to your house should be able to see it as they approach, and it should be on a non-combustible pole, whatever, and high enough so that you can be seen even if there's snow on the ground. Next slide. This is just an example of a driveway in this plan unit, and I think Dory showed this one as well. This is a private driveway, and you can see from the number of trees and the lack of crown spacing, they probably touch each other going across the driveway, that it is possible that someone trying to evacuate if the wildfire was there would not be able to get through their driveway. Next slide. So a big takeaway from this is be prepared. You could get an evacuation notice that says evacuate immediately, and you need to be ready to go. First challenge is be sure you get the notification. Jefferson County uses the Code Red system as their reverse 911 system. It only enrolls landlines, traditional landlines. If you have a landline that's voice over internet protocol, your number probably isn't included. It does not include cell phones. You can go to your911.net. There are also links to it on the foundation website and the fire department website, and register every device and way you want to be notified. If you have caregivers that are at your house during the day, for example, while you work, taking care of kids or taking care of elderly, be sure they register as well. Have a family emergency plan. You may not all be home and evacuate together. People may be down the hill, and a spouse at home. Don't count on having cell phone service. So if you can't reach each other, have a default place that you'll meet. Talk to your neighbors about backing you up in an emergency. If you have children at home or an elderly at home or pets at home, and there's an evacuation notice and you're not home, have a neighbor know what you need so that they can get your pet or your child or your mother-in-law out of the house and out of the community. And then also talk to them about what you can do together to make your homes and roadways easier. As I said, be prepared to leave immediately. I mean, like within 5 minutes, if you get an evacuation notice, especially on red flag days. Red flag days, fire risk is greater, and the risk of a wildfire getting out of control is much greater, where it can move very quickly, and it may have started a distance away, but it can be where you are quickly. Next slide. So you want to have what we call a go bag, ready, packed, so that you can just throw it in your car. And this is an example, a list of the kinds of things to consider for putting in your go bag. And then my suggestion is that you also have a piece of paper on the top that says the last minute things to grab. Be sure I take my computer, be sure I take my phone charger, those kinds of things. This particular graphic comes from a simple brochure that has been developed by the Evergreen Rotary program, Rotary Wildfire Ready. There are a set of 3 different pamphlets. They're very good and very informative. You can access them online, and the links are on, again, the fire department and the foundation website. There are also hard copies of these brochures in when you walk into Vista before you go into the office, so you can pick them up there. Next slide. So again, this is a Rotary Wildfire Ready, and it has 2 good pieces or types of information. One is, if you have time, and you could get a be prepared to evacuate, not an evacuate now. So there are things that you can do outside your home and inside your home if you have time. Not if you've been told to evacuate immediately, but if you have time. And the other is, it talks about well, I guess there are 3 things I want to mention. It talks about what to wear. Don't wear anything synthetic. Synthetic clothing melts in high heat, so it can actually burn you. You want to wear cotton clothes. You want to be covered as much as you can. If you have goggles, it could be smoky, wear them. We all now have masks, take the masks, because if it is very smoky, you may need them. At the bottom is how to get information about what's going on. And I would highly recommend that you put into your favorites My Mountain Town. It actually is out of Conifer. There's a mymountaintown.com. And the woman who runs it is very well connected. And she gets up-to-date, confirmed emergency information. I went there to find out about the Marshall Fire when it first started. And I'd love to say the Jeffco sheriff is on top of getting information out, but history says not so much. Hopefully it's going to get better. But look at mymountaintown.com for a good source of information. And do I have any other slides? I don't think so. Nope.
Hello, everyone. I'm Becky Smith, also a member of the Fire and Safety Committee. So we are doing these presentations to make you aware of what the CWPP has identified as risks, and we're trying to tailor it for your little pocket of the Genesee neighborhood. So just again, to build awareness, but also to give you resources. You know, we can be a resource. We've listed a lot of agencies that are resources, and to encourage you that there are things you can do. And some of them are very simple. You could go out this weekend and really improve the safety of your home and for your neighbors as well. In addition to these presentations, we want to encourage you to schedule a neighborhood walk. And this is where Brian and Dory come out and meet with you face to face, and they walk the neighborhood with you and talk about your concerns, to talk about that tree or that shared space between your neighbor who's not doing anything, and just to get some ideas, to give you some broad recommendations for how to harden your home. Brian will talk about what he plans to do with the open space around your homes. And it's just a good chance, in addition to learning from them, to have those conversations that Nancy was just talking about. you're walking with your neighbors, and it's time to learn about their situation and learn if they have a pet or if they're downtown during the week. If you haven't had those conversations, and a lot of people don't, it's not something you talk about at the mailbox, but I encourage you to schedule one of these so that you have a chance to get to know your neighbor in that way. Next slide, please, Brian. So we are asking you to step forward to schedule one of these neighborhood walks. All you have to do, it's pretty simple, is send an email to the Fire and Safety Committee at this email address that's on the slide. And then we will coordinate with you and Brian and Dory. And if you want to poll your neighbors as well, but we'll set up a date where you guys can all get together and do this walk. Right now, I think we have one date open in March, but it'll probably be April. You know, we'll get into the spring. We can do it. We can do it when it's warm out if you want. But we'll get that on the calendar. And then after the walk, we may also encourage you or give you ideas on how you can continue to mitigate. The picture on the screen here shows a lovely old tree, but it's got some fire risk associated with it. I'm sure you know by now, after sitting through this presentation, that it's got a lot of dead limbs that need to be limbed up. The tall grass underneath could be mowed. And this is something that you can do as a neighborhood. You can go and help your neighbors. You can get together and turn it into a social event and go for a barbecue afterwards. So those are just some ideas, some things that might come from this neighborhood walk, this street walk that we want you guys to schedule. I also wanted to mention, you know, if you do get together and do some of these mitigations in your neighborhood, there is a slash pickup scheduled for early June. Keep an eye out for those exact dates. And it's just a good opportunity to get out there and do something fun and simple. And then the foundation will come by and clean all that up for you guys. Dory's email address is on here again, because I want to encourage you to get in touch with her. What the neighborhood walk that I'm talking about is a little more general, but she will come out and she will give you a very detailed assessment of what you can do to make your home as safe as possible, to do everything to harden it and give it the best chance of surviving wildfire as possible. So I encourage you to email her and set that up. The next slide, please. This last slide just has a lot of the contact information that we've talked about, the agencies that we recommend that you go to get good information. And I believe towards the end of the presentation, Dory will put a link in the chat that will take you to a document that has these live links, as well as other information and other resources. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dory.
Thank you, Becky. All right, she's correct. I do have a link I'll put in the chat box, but before I do that, I would like to ask if you would please take a poll about this presentation. And this poll, it's only, I think it's 5 questions, it's multiple choice, it's very painless. So if you would please take this, I would really appreciate it. I just launched it. No one's going to see your answers. We'll get a report about that anonymously at the end. So can you see it? Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Okay, thank you, Nancy. Thank you. No one's going to know. No one can see your name. Come on. Please. So all you do, oh, yay, thank you. 16%.
Now, a few of us that are giving the presentation are not taking the poll, so that's
Right.
why it won't show 100%, but
I get that.
we hope some of you neighbors that have jumped on will take it.
Yeah. I'll leave it up for about another minute and then I'll end the poll. And while you're taking the poll, if there's a topic that we didn't cover, or some information that you wanted that we did not cover, please put that in the chat box. This is for us, if there's things we need to add to the presentation, take out of the presentation, we are open to all of those suggestions. All right, the poll's been up for 2 minutes, so I'll leave it for 30 more seconds and then I'll end it. And for those of you that attempted it, thank you, I appreciate it. And again, if you have a question that you've been thinking of, put it in the chat box, please. Chris watches it and then she will ask question or give us the questions at the end to give you an opportunity to answer, to get the answer that you would like. So, all right, about 5 more seconds. Thank you for participating. All right. And let's see. Oh, all right, let's see. And now the next thing I want to do is I want to share that link with you. So let me get the link. All right, so if you look at your chat box, I'm going to put it in there for everyone. Oh, come on. Oh, shoot, I think I did it twice because I got impatient. Let me delete it. Sorry. All right, there. So if you click on that link, it will take you to the document with the foundation information, the information that I'm sharing, and some other things like that. So, all right, and I'll put it in again at the end. All right, go ahead, Chris.
Hi there, I'm Chris Garlasco, and I'm also a member of the Fire and Safety Committee. Been a resident here in the neighborhood for over 30 years. Quick note before we jump to questions and answers is that you received the brochure in your mailbox and you received the flyer. All those links and resources were on that flyer. And again, all this information is on both the Genesee website and the Genesee Fire District website. So we're trying to make it incredibly easy that when a question comes to your mind, you can get the resources, get the answers that you need. So the first question up tonight came from Maria, and you're asking about what do you need to do if you want to remove trees on your property. Brian, do you want to field this with a little bit more detail than you gave during your talk about tree removals?
Sure. So the process for removing trees on your property it's pretty straightforward. We have a tree removal form on our website, and when you fill out that form, it comes right to me. And so you can either call me before you fill it out if you have questions and ask me to look at the trees, or you can just fill it out and it'll come right to me and I'll call you if I have questions, or if it's straightforward, I'll either send it to the ARC, depending on the scenario. If it's rather 6 trees or more then that you're asking to remove, then it would have to go to the ARC. If it's 5 trees or less that you want to remove for wildfire mitigation, usually those scenarios I can sign off without having to go through the ARC.
Brian, just to be a little more specific, I think I did an assessment at Maria's house, and I think she was asking about that, weren't you, Maria?
Yeah, I was asking about the ones that you specifically painted on.
Yeah, Brian would still look at them.
Yeah, and since the Marshall fire, there might be 1 or 2 more that I might want to remove.
Sure.
So I may have to go to ARC because I'm over that 6 limit.
But you know what? The ARC has streamlined, and they understand everyone's, that they want to do this effort. So it really has become a lot better.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
It's kind of a new day and age. The ARC is evolving just as our understanding of being prepared and having defensible space is evolving. And the good news is our ARC chair is a former chair of the Fire and Safety Committee. So we're really building that in, so it's integrated up and down through our governance. And Brian, are there, let's say you're doing some landscaping, you've removed a bunch of trees. I mean, are there trees that are better to have in your landscaping around your home than other trees?
Generally, yes. All trees and vegetation will burn, especially when the conditions are right, and the conditions are right when there's a fire actively happening. Usually the landscape is dry. So even things like cottonwoods and aspens can burn, but generally they do not carry fire as well as conifers like fir, spruce, or pine. So aspen is a preferred tree. It won't carry a crown fire the way a conifer would. Still don't want to have trees or vegetation within the first 5 feet of your house. If Dory sees that, she's going to say no. And the ARC, like Chris said, is updating their messaging as well. You're still allowed to do a lot of things. The ARC, based on most recent science and events, would suggest against it. And then too, there's even more reasons not to have trees in the first 5 feet of your house, because we have windstorms, and aspen and cottonwoods tend to be very weak, and they'll fall against your roof. So those are 2 examples to answer Chris's questions. There's other things like sumacs, chokecherries, and other smaller bushes. But just remember that everything can burn.
Some questions that came up from previous plan units that might be helpful tonight to go through is we hear this a lot. It's like, hey, I have a fire hydrant very close to my house. So does that mean I'm safer? I don't have to worry about some of these things?
That's a good question. If you have a structure fire at your house, it's fantastic. During a wildland fire, normally we do not attach ourselves to a hydrant outside of a home. We normally use hydrants away from the fire, and we have apparatus that bring water to other apparatus to refill our water. We don't want to be tethered to a hydrant because fires are dynamic and they move and they don't just stay in one place. So normally we do not stay tethered to a hydrant in front of a home.
Also, to talk a little bit more about safe evacuations and the fire risk on our existing routes. Well, Brian, what about mowing along some of the driveways, private drives out onto the roadways?
Sure. So I strongly encourage folks to mow their grasses on their private property down to 4 inches along your defensible space, which includes your driveway and where you would evacuate. It's a topic of discussion right now about folks mowing on open space, because there's a lot of mixed scenarios where your home ends and then open space picks up, and that's part of your evacuation route. We don't have the capacity. We don't actually have a mower, and it's just me, and I have an assistant open space manager. And then in the season, we have 3 seasonals, but we're out there doing our roadside thinning, which is removing trees. And so we're working through a policy right now that would allow residents of Genesee Foundation to mow on open space if they so choose, if they want to do that to improve their evacuation.
Brian, I have a question. The hill north of our house, it's against the road, which is our property, I think up to 15 feet of the county road. that's dangerous. Like you cannot put a mower on that, it's so steep. And yeah, I'd love to take a weed whacker, but I mean, like the elk go up there, but that's really tough. I mean, I don't know how you can do that without getting hurt.
And what I'd say is concentrate on your defensible space. So your zone 1, zone 2. And yeah, there's a lot of scenarios in Genesee and Jefferson County where it's steep slopes of rocks and nobody's going to bring a mower. No one's even going to bring a weed whacker up there. So the best thing that you can do is home hardening in defensible space.
Yeah, except part of that hill is within the defensive. I mean, it's within the 45 feet.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, if it's a scenario that she's saying that you're not going to bring a weed whacker up there, you could hire someone to do it, to try and do it. Otherwise, focus on everything before that within the 45 feet that you're saying.
And if you can get somebody to limb up trees, then they're less likely to get involved by burning grass.
Yeah, luckily that hill, there's no trees. That's the only good thing. There's no trees on that hill, except in the open space side, which they were in open space, but I limbed them up to 10 feet because they were dead limbs years ago.
Brian's smiling.
Well, I went to open space. The manager didn't do anything. And I'm like, I just told my tree guys, can you just take off the dead limbs, please? So I did.
So yeah, I mean, my policy for that is, like I said, like I don't have the capacity to do that, but yeah, folks can do that. And that's the policy I'm working through right now. It's kind of nebulous at this point. That's why I'm smiling, because I'm happy that you did it, but there's really no standing policy. So we want that to be the scenario that folks can do that. It's just a question of liability that we need to figure out.
Thank you.
People at previous presentations asked about what about a safe zone within Genesee? Where can we go?
There is no identified safe zone to go from the CWPP within the Genesee community. So if you're worried about fire, you should evacuate. As soon as you hear about an evacuation notice, you should evacuate. Evacuate.
What about grants coming up? We've had grants in the past. Are there grants that might help us with some of this work?
You want me to answer it?
Sure.
So in 2014, we successfully got a grant from the Colorado State Forest Service to support private property defensible space. And we had 45 residents who took advantage of it, and half of the cost for tree removal was paid for, was reimbursed by the state. We submitted a similar grant in 2021, and it was not funded. We didn't get terribly good feedback about why it wasn't, but in talking with both foresters at the Colorado State Forest Service and among ourselves, we feel that applying again, and we will apply again, but we're going to do it a little differently. Applying for individual private property defensible space scattered all around Genesee has value for the individual homeowners, but it's hard to make a case that it has strategic value to the community as a whole. There's a saying in the wildfire prevention community that we need to stop funding random acts of mitigation. It has to be strategic. So what we intend to do is to try and get groups of homes to all apply for the grant. And we feel that if we can, rather than showing a bunch of scattered homes, show groups of homes that are near each other If there's open space around them, Brian will probably throw in mitigating open space as well, so that our grant application is more strategic. Now, one thing I do need to say about the grant-supported private property mitigation is that you have to do everything in order to meet the Colorado State Forest Service guidelines. You can't, if there's a tree you love and you talk to whoever marks trees and they said, yeah, there's no way we can save this tree, that tree has to be taken down. Unless you do it all, you won't get reimbursed. You know, if you want control over what you do, it may not be for you. But the average in Genesee, the average private property defensible space tree removal is $8,000 to $10,000 generally. We've had some that were $20,000 and some that were just a couple of $1,000s, but it is expensive.
And any information about contractors that do home hardening?
No, but I'd sure love some. It's a hard one.
Well, that's really most of the important questions that we generated tonight and from previous presentations. So again, there was some great articles in this month's Genesee. I hope you pick it up and take a look and use the resources, our Genesee website, our fire district website, and don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call.
Can I just, oh, sorry. Oh, I am unmuted. Can I just want to answer about the home hardening, to mention that the ARC is in the process of putting together some information about the kinds of materials you could use in that 0 to 5 foot area that should be free of vegetation. It can be just mineral soil, but if you wanted to put rock or something like that, they're generating some guidance about that. And I think that many of the landscapers, if you tell them what you need, they will do it. And I know I've talked to the guy who rakes my pine needles, and he does a lot of assorted projects. And he said, you know, if we told him what we wanted, that he would take care of it. So we don't have lists of those kinds of people. We do have lists of tree removal people, and Brian can give you personal recommendations as well based on his experience. And I'll also, just to be clear, if we were to get a grant, it only is the tree removal associated with creating defensible space. It does not include the 0 to 5 feet unless you have a tree that needs to be removed there. And when we wrote the first grant, we tried to include that. And what we were told is it's hard to draw the line between fire mitigation and landscaping. And so therefore they weren't going to include that. So we're kind of all on our own. But again, if you get a group of neighbors, all of whom are interested, you may get a much better price. You know, even for delivering the rock, if that's what you use to go in there. If they deliver 3 times as much to houses all up and down the street, you may be able to get a deal.
All right, so if we don't have any more questions, and I'm going to tell everyone thank you so much for coming to the presentation this evening. Remember that this recording will be on the foundation website. It will be on Genesee Fire Rescue website. All those links are in the chat box again to the document. Please feel free to reach out at any time with any questions that you might have. So thank you so much for your time this evening.
That's how free now it is.